Thank you. Thank you very much for this fascinating introduction to the world of artificial intelligence and AI. In the interest of time, may I welcome our next speaker that is touching upon a theme that was just mentioned, which is the theme of ESG and sustainable finance and its implication.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. And I think Daniel's intervention was very, very timely indeed. And thank you very much to Professor for the invitation, because I think this is a really, really important topic we should delve into as we're trying to mitigate the challenges that climate change and environmental degradation pose, and the role that financial systems can play in achieving these sustainable development goals that we set in place. And I will start with a staggering number. We need $5 trillion a year by 2030 to achieve, to avert the climate crisis, according to the Reuters Foundation. And simply, this money is not flowing at the rate we need. From transport to agriculture to electricity, progress is happening, but is lagging in most sectors in terms of reducing planet-hitting emissions that would limit the pace of global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade and will avert its worst effects. However, on the positive notes, there are a lot of positive intentions from banks and investors. There are around 450 financial institutions around the world that have committed to aligning their financing to net zero by 2050. And they collectively manage around $130 trillion. Problem solved, right? We have trillions, we need trillions, let's bring them together. I really hope that was easy to do, but as you can imagine, unfortunately, reality is really, really difficult, and it's much harder and requires efforts to actually realize the benefits, to basically have these trillions flowing the right way. So I will focus my analysis on two main players and an underlying factor: the governments, the banks themselves, as well as data. So starting from the first, when investors and banks decide where to make investments, they look for three things. First, are there right public policies in place? Second, what type of capital are we looking for? And third, is there demand? So the private sector banks and investors, they have a lot of capital, but not always the right risk appetite. And particularly a number of solutions that yield the most benefit when it comes to results in sustainability initiatives come from challengers that increase that risk threshold that a number of investors are looking to position their funds into. On the other hand, governments are willing to take some risks when it comes to issues that matter to them, such as climate justice or social equity, but they don't have much capital. And we see that in areas of housing or in electric vehicle charging, where that gap actually exists and governments can actually make a huge difference. In housing, for example, they can provide guarantees or concessional forms of lending. And this will allow private sector finance to actually be positioned more easily. When we're talking particularly about affordable housing, a little bit of government money can go a long way. Here in the UK, there is such a scheme which is called Help to Buy. If you see what Help to Buy has become, especially in mega urban centers, it's almost obsolete. So how do governments actually refresh these initiatives with a particular focus on sustainability targets? Equally, in EV charging, having the right level of coverage has become a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Number one anxiety for drivers that want to switch from a conventional vehicle to an electric vehicle is range coverage. Will I have enough, enough power to get home? How far away is the quickest supercharger from my home to go and refuel? Will I be able to do 3 school runs or 5 school runs with one charging? All of that. Equally, from a private investment perspective, there is increased scrutiny on ROI per charger. And as you can imagine, not all areas offer a high return on investment. So how government creates guarantees and programs that create this ecosystem of partners that say, perfect, you can actually position yourself in this high ROI location like central London, but at the same time, with a few incentives, you have a bit of an obligation to actually be this provider of last resorts in some remote areas that will not yield such a high ROI. But it's important to have that network to incentivize other people to drop conventional vehicles towards electric vehicles. Going into my second pillar, how should banks structure the products they offer? The positive side is that there is a lot of focus on financial vehicles to support goals towards sustainability activities by financial institutions. To name a few, green mortgages. So green mortgages is a way basically to incentivize customers to buy green homes or to take a loan to upgrade their existing home to become green and limit their environmental footprint. Easy, right? Not so. Traditionally, mortgages were underwritten on the objective value of the property, and then it was a very, very straightforward process of having the loan secured against the property. If you were keep paying your monthly payments, no harm done. If not, the home would be taken away. Linear process. What happens now when green mortgages are actually giving preferential rates to customers on specific targets around energy intensity, energy consumption, water consumption? It just becomes more difficult for financial institutions to track data from all of these variable sources, actually make sense of this data, and inform the decisions on whether the investments they made are actually green investments. At the same time, most financial institutions are still on a search for that silver lining of one provider that has all the answers, all the data, is able to basically navigate them through that complex decision-making process and monitoring process that they're embarking into and see value straight away. Unfortunately, this solution doesn't exist. And banks should go a long way to create these ecosystems of data providers that will give them all of these unstructured or structured data, like Daniel mentioned, and they will need AI models and machine learning models to make sense of it. And that will differ from sector to sector. If I'm focusing on agriculture, I don't need the same data as I need in housing. In agriculture, I will need spatial data. I will need weather data. I will need foresting data. In housing, I will need material energy intensity, CO2 footprint, energy consumption, etc. And this lands to the common denominator that we have that underpins both the initiatives that banks and governments should undertake, which is data, or rather the lack of data. In order for banks to understand the impact their investment portfolios has on the planet and nature, they need the right benchmark data. I think, Daniel, you mentioned on that as well. At the moment, there is a huge divergence on benchmark data from different rating agencies. So a bank's portfolio may be green according to Sustainalytics, but it may not be green according to S&P, just because they follow various different methodologies. And obviously, as you can imagine, that creates a backwardation towards any progress, because a bank needs to be 100% secure that if it's going back to markets or investors asking for money, they're not going to be somebody challenging whether their positioning has been green or not. So, and the staggering thing is that if you look at any other type of rating data that other providers such as Moody's, Fitch, Bloomberg provide, there is 99% correlation, regardless of who the provider is. When it comes to sustainability, that figure drops to only 30%. So there needs to be a lot of effort in agreeing on a methodology that actually tell us whether some investments are green or not. And talking now about governments, right, and the policies and instruments that they issue and the foundational role, as I explained, that it takes to streamlining the trillions we need towards the right way. In order for governments to create accurate programs and accurate permits and accurate guarantees, etc., they need to have accurate benchmarking data themselves. And they need to have also the right target results in place in order to budget accordingly. That's how it works, or it doesn't work, and that's why a lot of government initiatives, they fall short of their promises, just because there are many unknowns. So at the moment, there are a lot of dispersed data, but these large data, large data models that we see in the news are not actually used by governments. So how do we change that? Or how do governments change that? One, first of all, they need to influence public policy on infrastructure, on housing, on key sectors that they are affected a lot by ESG initiatives or sustainability initiatives, to create a common standard that is trackable and it's set in a way. At the same time, they need to work with the providers in each of this sector, such as real estate companies, developers, etc., to actually say, how can we achieve this result without a huge burden to the end consumer? So where do I come in as a government and create a buffer for you so that you don't, and then I hold you accountable to that buffer so that you don't actually, push all the costs down the value chain? Because if owning a green home or having an electric vehicle or all the aspects around sustainability becomes an expensive endeavor for consumers, they will never go for it. So how do we create that buffer but still having that standardization? And third is work on education. Who can tell me here what it takes for a 100-year-old Victorian building like the many we live in here in London to become green? Apart from EPC data, that they're very dispersed, they're quite limited, they're very unreliable at times, and they're only basically give you an indication of how much electricity you're going to pay, more or less. So as a colleague of mine said, and I will stop here, Barbara, data is the oxygen of sustainability. If we don't have the right data, availability and quality we're dealing with this very, very smart, models that Daniel talked about. But if we don't have data availability, how would governments and investors intensify their efforts towards a green future? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I ask you a very quick question, just to link the presentation by Daniel to your presentation. What are your thoughts about AI and how AI informs investment decisions in the context of sustainable finance?
Obviously, very interesting and timely, in the sense, but because the challenges that we face to go faster, to move faster, when it comes to addressing environmental degradation, they should leverage technology and technological advancements to accelerate progress. So AI being part of it, but it's a matter of how we leverage technology overall. So AI and machine learning, for example, as Daniel mentioned, they can help you make sense of large data sets, understand energy consumptions, resource management. Analyzing these data sets will also help you identify patterns, predict patterns, actually have a forward-looking view as opposed to a backward-looking view that we have up to now. Understand energy usage in buildings, in manufacturing processes, across the supply chain. Through that real-time monitoring, you're able to basically adjust as we go, be more agile. But we go back to my earlier point around data availability. You need to have data to actually run these models and make sense of it and not have skewed results, because this model will always yield a result. The problem is, how reliable is that result? And how can we ensure consistency of the result? So I would say that it is, again, around governments and organizations forming strong strategies that they have at their core, creating that ecosystem of data providers that then would allow them to run these large data set models, as well as having performance metrics. That is really important around orchestrating and realizing value across the sustainability initiatives. A number of my clients come to me and say, perfect, so we've invested X amount of millions in that endeavor. But the business is asking what the return of an investment. We have an answer when it comes to environmental footprint. We don't have an answer that the business executive can actually understand and make financial business decision based on it. So how do we bridge that gap? And then you have all of these live sensors, such as Internet of Things, etc., that they do exist right now. And they do provide live data points, so it basically creates data that is required. However, how do we make this data available to governments and financial institutions? there needs to be the right privacy framework in place, there need to be the right, definitely public consultation. It will be a thinking issue. So how do we go beyond that hurdle? Because data exists, it's just very dispersed.